everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Christina, and I lead marketing initiatives here at Advanced Installer. I'm excited to be your moderator for this session, where we are going to talk about Advanced Installer PowerShell integration. Before we dive into the content, let's take a moment to review a few technical details. First, about the questions. We welcome all your questions. Please submit them by typing them into the Q&A pane of your control panel at any time during the presentation. We have some of our technical support colleagues joining us today, and they will help us answer your questions as they come. We will go through all of them again in the second part of this presentation. Please keep in mind that this is a live webinar and that we are recording it. We will upload the recording to our YouTube channel and send you the link within the next 24 hours. So today we are delighted to have our colleague Gabriel Diaconita as our returning guest. Gabriel leads the engineering team at Advanced Installer, and he is our go-to person for any PowerShell questions. We are thrilled to have him with us today, and I'm sure he's going to provide a lot of valuable insights. So, Gabriel, welcome. You have the stage.
Thank you, Christina. Let me share my screen.
Sure.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. In this webinar, we are going to explore how you can use Advanced Installer to write, test, and execute PowerShell scripts in your installation packages. My name is Gabriel, and I will be your host for the next hour. In this session, we will cover the following topics. First, I will introduce briefly what Advanced Installer does and how the need to use PowerShell scripts arises. Then we will walk through the built-in user interface in Advanced Installer that allows you to define scripts, set up their execution moment, and further set configuration options regarding the scripts, such as 32-bit, 64-bit, digital signature, and so on. Then we will do a short demo in which we will explore live the process of writing and testing PowerShell scripts in Advanced Installer, along the way making it customizable using script parameters and Windows installer properties, and we will see how they allow your scripts to exhibit dynamic behavior at install time when the packages are being installed on your client's machines. So let's get started introducing Advanced Installer, what it does. Advanced Installer, as I'm sure most of you know, is a Windows installer authoring tool that simplifies the process of creating and maintaining installers for your applications. You simply define a project, and from that unified project, you can generate different output packages. You can generate MSI, EXE, AppV, and the latest and shiniest MSIX packages. In this webinar, we are going to focus on exclusively on Windows installer packages, that is MSI and EXE packages built with Advanced Installer. Once you have these packages, they can be deployed on a wide range of operating systems, spanning from the Windows Vista OS to the latest Windows 11. Here at Advanced Installer, we strive to give you an intuitive user interface and quick access to a wide range of technologies and configuration options. You will find baked-in options for configuring a wide array of technologies, such as IIS websites, SQL databases, folders, files, registry entries, file associations, shortcuts, and many more. But once you've defined the major sections of your applications, added required files and the app itself, you may find that there are some specific settings that you still need to make. Try as we might, we at Advanced Installer cannot possibly cover all possible configuration options. This means that for specialized configurations, you want your setup packages to be able to apply them, even though we don't have predefined support in Advanced Installer. Not to worry though, because we have a number of mechanisms in place that you can use for this purpose. The common infrastructure behind these methods is, of course, the Windows Installer custom action mechanism, for which we have a well-established dedicated view in Advanced Installer. To enumerate a few on this, the bottom side of this slide, you can invoke a DLL, either native or written in C#, or simply run an executable file that you've created. You can run a VB script, and of course, the main subject of our session here, invoking a PowerShell script. We must take note that PowerShell script support is not native to Windows Installer. Only calling native tools and VB script is native to Windows Installer. This means that if you write your own invocation of PowerScript, of a PowerShell script, you will find yourself in a position that you will be unable to use Windows Installer properties. You don't have APIs to access them. Not to worry though, because our predefined support for PowerShell scripts handles this, and you will have access to properties. You can access them to read them, you can set them, modify them, and make sure that the rest of the installation goes on accordingly. All right. As I mentioned previously, PowerShell is not the only way to achieve custom installation behavior. You can use simply a CMD invocation or running a custom tool. So why should you use PowerShell? You are here with me today, so I'm sure I don't need to fight very hard to convince you. You may already be sold on PowerShell, but allow me to express a few advantages that choosing PowerShell brings. Here we need to consider 2 points of view. First, there is your perspective, the package author and maintainer, and then there is the perspective of your client, the perspective of the target machine. So from your perspective, the package maintainer, your scripts are transparent, to put it simply. You don't have an opaque layer standing behind you and the code that's being executed. Consider, for example, if you have an exe that you are invoking or a DLL, you need to have a separate project, say a Visual Studio project, that generates that executable or DLL file. So the code will not be in your Advanced Installer project. You need to have that DLL project be built and then include that executable in your project. This will make it difficult for you or your colleagues to quickly see at a glance what a particular DLL invocation is doing. So from this point of view, PowerShell allows us to be transparent. We offer a view where you will see the code directly in Advanced Installer. What you see is what you execute, basically. Also, PowerShell is currently the lingua franca of scripts on Windows, and it has a clear and modern syntax for a scripting language, and this gives us more readability. Your team is in a much better position to understand the custom logic that's being implemented in your scripts. Then, from the perspective of your clients, the target machines, PowerShell now is an established technology. It's a mature technology and is virtually available on all personal computers from Windows Vista onwards. So using PowerShell, one can reach the entire breadth of Windows APIs, both native and managed. And there are more and more PowerShell modules being released along the years, from which you can configure specialized systems such as Internet Information Services. But, however, not everything is so clear regarding PowerShell. There are a few special mentions we must make. Let's highlight an important fact. There are two flavors of PowerShell currently. Notice the missing keyword in the second name here. It's PowerShell, not Windows PowerShell. And the executable is different. Instead of PowerShell.exe, we have pwsh.exe. So the arrow in this slide represents the evolution over time. Windows PowerShell was the original one, introduced back in 2006 with Windows Vista and also targeting Windows XP. And 10 years later, in 2016, we got PowerShell, which is a cross-platform version of PowerShell that's now available on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. The latest version at the time of this presentation is 7.3. However, you can use Windows PowerShell also. You don't need to migrate to PowerShell 7. That decision is up to you. Being built directly upon the .NET technology stack, each version of PowerShell is directly bound to a specific version of .NET. So here we can see that Windows PowerShell has been frozen at version 5.1 and no longer actively developed for new features. So any new features that are being introduced in PowerShell will be made accessible only in PowerShell 7. However, PowerShell 5.1 being already more than an established technology, most of the APIs and language features that we need will already be present. And Windows PowerShell has the advantage that it's built in Windows from the box. So you don't need to install it separately and make sure that the target machine has PowerShell installed. If you decide to use PowerShell 7, that is an extra care that you must take and ensure that if you want to run a 32-bit PowerShell 7, that is installed on the target computer. If you want to use a PowerShell 7 on 64-bit script, then you need to make sure that PowerShell 7 64-bit is installed on the target machine. And as I've mentioned here in this table, each PowerShell 7 version comes tightly bound to a .NET version. which is a pretty significant change to make on a computer. And there are particular scenarios where you will not be able to apply this change to a computer because it would be very disruptive. So from our point of view, right now, we are recommending that you continue to use Windows PowerShell. We will highlight soon in the following demo how you can control this, how you can set which version of PowerShell to use, either the classic Windows PowerShell or the latest PowerShell 7. And you will see that it is zero friction and extremely quick to do this change. All right, so this is the moment where we are going to be really close to the demo. Just a moment of your attention more, and let me be more explicit about what Advanced Installer does for you regarding PowerShell. As I've mentioned before, you could simply manually invoke PowerShell and give it a temporary file from which to execute a particular script. However, that would be quite difficult to manage. You need to manage the temporary file. You lose access to Windows installer properties. There is the whole aspect of return codes and error management that you need to properly take care of, and other aspects that you need to be aware of. So this is why we decided to offer predefined support in Advanced Installer for PowerShell scripts. We have built-in support for this. You get to decide and control the precise moment where your script executes. As I've previously mentioned on the previous slide, you have access to either Windows PowerShell or PowerShell 7 on both 32-bit and 64-bit, and highly valuable access to Windows installer properties. These enable your scripts to exhibit dynamic behavior at runtime or install time as a function of other actions that are taking place during the installation process. One important, last but not least, fact mentioned here on this slide is that all PowerShell scripts in Advanced Installer are digitally signed by default. We chose to do this, to choose signing by default in order to increase security of deployed packages and to be more compliant and ready for Windows 11 Smart App Control, which most of you should be aware of, introduces very tight rules around thoroughly signing applications, packages, and all executable content throughout the packages. Now, finally, we've reached the point that the slides stop and we get to get our hands dirty for a little bit, play with Advanced Installer and write some PowerShell code. So let's jump to Advanced Installer. I have here ready the latest version of Advanced Installer. Let's jump in, create a new installer project. And here we are greeted by the main interface of Advanced Installer. But this is a package, we need something to be packaged. For this demo, we are going to be using a small app that's representative of the kind of task we are trying to achieve. Here is Playground app. Let's see what it does. So we have a main.exe file here and a configuration file. This configuration file has two settings. It has a setting on the first line for username And on the second line, it has a setting for configuring a preference for dark theme, either on or off. Now, let's try to run this application to make sure that everything is all right before we try to deploy it. And we can see that launching it, we are greeted with a window saying hi. It's taking the name and supposedly taking this setting into account. Let's try to modify it and make sure that this configuration file is actually doing what we think it does. Let's change from John Smith to simply John, and dark theme from false to true. Launch it again, and we can see that both these configurations options are doing something. The name has changed, and the background itself is now dark themed. All right. This being file configuration will have some, will pose some minor headaches for us, and I will tell you soon why. First, we need to add our files, application files to the project. So let's just simply go and add our files. I'm going to come here and select all my files, and that's it. All my files have been added. Now let's go to product details here in the left pane and configure a name for our application. And like we've said, we call our application Playground app. All right, version 1.7. And let's choose a company name, Playground Inc. All right. Now, here in the ribbon in the project pane, we can click Run to test our newly made installer. And I will save my installer right on the desktop here. Now the project is being built, and we can see that we have a functional setup package for our application. But now comes the trick. We would like to offer our user the ability to configure this file config.txt during installation, so that the application is already configured at first launch and is configured according to the preferences of the final user. And this is where we can use PowerShell. Now, like I said, we offer, as you can see, the left menu here has a lot of configuration options. But for this particular scenario, we are unable in Advanced Installer to configure it out of the box. We cannot write such a configuration option. It is too specific, too specialized. If it would be a registry entry, we would be able to use the registry view here and configure our registry keys and values. But sadly, it is not. It is a configuration file in text format with a particular pattern. So, like I said, the mechanism that we can use in such situations where we need to apply specialized configurations is custom actions. And this is the custom actions view. Here, there are two main parts. There is the middle part here, which hosts in the upper side a list of predefined custom actions, where we will find also two entries for PowerShell. We have the bottom side here, which highlights the steps of the installation. And we will, in a few moments, go into further detail regarding this sequence of standard actions, as they are called. And then in the right side here, we find the help for the current entry. until we add a custom action. Once we add a custom action, let's add the one for PowerShell. If we cannot find it at a quick glance, we simply write here PowerShell, and we see the ones with any connection to our typed word, in this case, power. Let's add an inline script. Simply double click on it, and then the help in the right side here disappeared, and now we are greeted with a specialized user interface for writing and testing our script. Now, this also has two parts. There is the upper part here, which has the script editing pane, and this is resizable because being a script, it can get quite large and we need all the space we can get. And in the lower side here, we have an execution area regarding the time of execution, further options, and conditions regarding the execution of our custom action. And this area is common to all custom actions added in Advanced Installer. Let me illustrate this quickly. Let's say I want to launch a file. You will see that now we have a different UI. The upper part here is specialized to this particular custom action launch file, but the lower part has remained the same. So if we delete this because we don't need it, back to PowerShell. Now that we've introduced the main parts of the UI, let me go through this default script that we are adding. So in order to introduce people to how to use PowerShell in a custom action, we've added this default script, and it has a few parts. The main part is this one, which first of all mentions with a sharp requires prefix the version of PowerShell we need to execute this script. And in this case, it is version 3. This means that this is the minimum required version of PowerShell. On my machine, being a Windows 11 machine, I have Windows PowerShell 5.1, and that will end up being used. So it satisfies being greater or equal than 3, and it will run using Windows PowerShell 5.1. And let me illustrate that. I moved a little bit too fast. So before I do anything more, let me highlight this button here. When you're writing your scripts, most of the times you will be able to click this button here and quickly test your script without going through the steps of building your package and going through the installation steps. So just by clicking this button here, you can quickly test your script. And in this case, our script greets us and tells us which version of PowerShell we're using. In this case, like I mentioned, PowerShell 5.1. And it's a 32-bit PowerShell script. If I want to access, let's say Windows, not Windows PowerShell, but PowerShell 7, all I need to do is put a version here that's greater than 6. That was the breaking point in PowerShell. PowerShell 5 was the last version of Windows PowerShell. Starting from PowerShell 6, we are dealing not with Windows PowerShell, but with PowerShell, which is cross-platform. So if you mention here version 6 for the requires section, then we will try to invoke your script using PowerShell 6 or greater. And if I click again the test button, let's see what happens. And now this execution log, which we get when testing our scripts, will tell us a few things. First of all, it will give us a return code. And in Windows, as we know, we are looking for a 0 return code, which means success. A value different from 0 is not a good thing and highlights an error. And in this case, the script output here says that an error has occurred and could not find pwsh.exe 32-bit. And this is a warning that I gave you earlier on. If you decide to use PowerShell 6 or 7, then it has to be installed on the target machine. If it is not installed, the script will fail. And depending here in the lower part, you have a preference if you want the installation to fail when an error is occurred during the execution of this custom action. If this is checked, and it is checked by default, then the installation itself will fail. And let's see that happening. Now, my script is this one here. Let's give it a name of my script. And let's move it up here. As you can see, I can drag and drop anywhere in this sequence. And now, let's quickly look at the main stages shown here. We have the wizard stage, the dialog stage, and the install execution stage. The dialog stage is made of steps that are happening when the user interface for the installation is displayed on screen and the dialogues are being shown. The second stage, install execution, is happening after the install button is pressed and the installation begins happening. So in order to quickly test a script, we have two options. Either we click this button here for testing it, or we move our script up here in the dialog stage before the user selection. This means that when I click, like I said, we can click here in the ribbon, the run button, and our script will run very soon after the installation starts. And in our case, we see here that the installation has failed because we have this checkbox enabled, the fail installation if custom action returns an error. And now let's take a moment and see and rewind to see the reason that it is failing. So it is failing because we don't have PowerShell 6 or 7 installed for 32-bit. But what if I want a 64-bit script? You might say, well, then you can go over to PowerShell Script Options here. And if I click on this, I get a dialog with a few more options for my scripts. Here, the first one that we can see is for the script platform. And this is the one we need to modify if we want to explicitly call a 64-bit script. So the default here is 32-bit x86 for the obvious reason that even 64-bit installations of Windows can run 32-bit apps and PowerShell scripts. So this is the safest choice that covers basically all machines if this version is less or equal than 5, meaning Windows PowerShell. So PowerShell 5.1 in this case. But I can choose because in some situations, for example, considering IIS configurations, our PowerShell module may be available only on 32-bit or 64-bit. So in some situations, it is required to choose explicitly 64-bit. And then we can set the script platform here to 64-bit. And then if we try to test it again, we will see that now we are running in PowerShell 5.1 64-bit. Now the return code has been found to be 0, which is a good thing, means success. And we are being informed here that the script output was this one, hello from PowerShell 5.1 64-bit. Here we have some verbose output that is a side effect of this line, the loading of an assembly. The system Windows Forms assembly that we use here to display a message box. And as I'm sure you all know, if we want to suppress such verbose output messages, we can simply pipe them to out null. And if I test my script again, now we see again the message box, which is this line being executed. And further, when I click OK, now I've gotten rid of the verbose output from the assembly loading function, and I have only my output and OK from the message box. This invocation here, which I can also pipe to out null. The main advantage of having this button so closely to our script is that we can use it very quickly and iterate fast in our script editing process. Now we've gotten rid also of the OK message that was not our interest. We have this message which is from here, the right output line. And a very important section in this script execution log is this one. Here we are informing you that the script execution has had side effects regarding Windows installer properties. So here we can see that the PS version property was being set to this version. And this, if we take a look at our script here, we will see is this line in action. So here we are calling set property for PS version and are setting it to the value of this expression. All right. Now, let's go back to this dialog a bit more and talk about the other options available here. First, the digital signature of the script, like I mentioned before, is on by default. We give you the option to disable it, so leaving your scripts not signed, but there is no real reason for doing that. The default is a good one, and you should leave this on so that the scripts remain digitally signed. Now, of course, when it comes to digital signature, you will need to set up your package to use digital signature. So here in the left menu, if we go to digital signature, we need to enable digital signing for our package and make sure that we use a self-valid certificate. In my case, this is a self-signed certificate that I'm using. And now if I go back to my PowerShell script over here, I have one more option that I need to introduce to you. And this is the preferred launch folder option. Now, regarding this feature, we have gotten very energetic feedback from our customers requesting this feature over time. And the gist of it is as follows. On some machines, there are special security controlled environments, and in which case there are explicit rules, access control rules in place preventing the execution of code from unauthorized locations. And at install time, our scripts are being instantiated in the temp directory. However, in such machines as I described just now, you are unable to execute code from that location. So that means that there are special enabled locations that allow execution of code. And those are specific to those environments. And this is why we enable you for those mainly enterprise bound scenarios to specify a custom location in which the script will be spawned and executed from, so that you may execute code from that location. However, this being a very specialized scenario, we will not strictly follow this preference. This is why we are calling it a preferred folder for launching your script, because you may enter something here that is valid on some computers but invalid on others. So at install time, we will try to put our script, your script, in that location and run it. But if that fails, if privileges are not valid for that location, then we will fall back to the temporary folder. So regardless of what I put here, temp folder is always used as a backup if that fails. And here, this is a formatted field which can directly use Windows installer properties. In this case, we are using the temp folder property. And when we hover over it, we see a preview of the expanded path, which is that directory displayed on screen. Now let's do an experiment and change this location to something on the desktop. Let's create a new folder here and use this location as a preferred launch folder. I mentioned that this is only for testing purposes. Please do not put such hard-coded values in your install packages. You should properly vet them and make sure that they are as general as possible. I'm only using this to highlight something. And when I'm clicking OK here, let's actually build. This is a step where testing the script from this button is no longer serving my point here. If I do this, the script is executed, and it is being spawned in the correct location here. But if we open it, we see that we have two scripts here. First, we have a script, a helper script, which we use to implement logic regarding Windows installer properties, accessing and writing them. That is only used as a helper script. And the main script, which is the one you are writing, is this one. However, you will observe that there is no digital signature here. A PowerShell script has the digital signature section directly in place at the bottom area of the file. And there is none here. This is because when testing the script, we don't sign anything. In order to do that, we must run the build and run the installer itself. Like I've shown you before, over in digital signature, I have enabled digital signing. So now let's just run the project again. And if we run it again, now we are greeted with this message box again. And it is useful to us that it is a message box because a message box will stop the execution at this precise moment in time. So our execution is stuck here at this line that's showing the message box. This means that these temporary artifacts that we are creating are present on the disk for us to examine them. And if we look over to our script here now, we can observe that we have our code and the digital signature that's required. But let's make sure that the digital signature is valid. And if we open a PowerShell window here, let's get the signature status for this file. And this file is called SCR from script 80.ps1. And for this file, the signature is valid. So the digital signature process has been successful, and we have properly signed digital script. However, when it comes to digitally signed PowerShell scripts, you need to take into account one more fact, that if the target machine on which you are running the script has a group policy in place for restricting the execution of scripts except signed scripts, you must have your digital certificate that you are using to sign the package be present in the trust or publisher's store in order for the script execution to succeed. So that's something you need to consider. We also mentioned this here. If you click this link, more about digitally signed scripts, and if I open this link, my my second monitor here decided to change the layout. Let me fix it quickly. All right, let me bring it to you. So this help page regarding the script options dialog has a section that highlights this fact regarding group policies for digitally signed scripts. You need to make sure that the certificate is present in trusted publishers. This is mandated by Microsoft, and it is outside of our control. Okay, so now that we've introduced this dialog, the platform of the script, oh, and I forgot to mention the auto setting here. What does auto mean? Auto means whatever your Windows is, 32-bit or 64-bit, that is what is going to be used. So on 32-bit Windows, it will be a 32-bit script. On 64-bit Windows, it will be a 64-bit script. We don't have this selected as a default in order to prevent surprises. Like I said, there are some functions and modules in PowerShell that are available only on 32-bit or on 64-bit PowerShell. And we want to avoid situations where the code might run on some machines and not run on others. But if you decide this is appropriate for your scripts, you're free to use this setting. In my case, I'm going to use the 64-bit option here to highlight that it works for Windows PowerShell, like we tried before, but also if I say here version 7 and test it again, we will see that it also works for PowerShell 7, because on my machine, PowerShell 7.3.2 is installed, but only on 64-bit. I've shown earlier that if the script had a 32-bit preference, then the invocation will fail. So I have installed on my machine PowerShell 7 on 64-bit, and in this case, the invocation will succeed. Now let's fall back to our safest version here, which is 3. PowerShell 3 is a well-established version now that was in more ways than one the first fully mature version of PowerShell, and it's available starting from way back in time. All Windows, modern Windows installations have at least PowerShell 3, and we can use it to access most of the functionality we need. Now let's get rid of this demo function and try to write our own code. Now, let's take a moment to remind ourselves. Of course, I still have this message box displayed here, and please observe these artifacts here. When I click OK, the execution goes on and we no longer see anything here. Advanced Installer takes care to properly take care of temporary resources. You won't have things remaining behind. All right, now, like I was saying, let's remind ourselves of what we are trying to accomplish. We have this small application which we are trying to package, and we have two options which we need to set. First, a name for the user, and then a preference for dark theming. And what better way to do that than with a dialog? Let's add a dialog for that. So after choosing, this is the folder dialog, in which the user configures the location for the app to be installed. Let's create a new dialog here and say here, customize your app. And here, the customize step. And let's add a few controls. Let's add firstly a label saying, here we, in the right side, we have properties for the current UI element. And let's say here for this label, your name. All right. Now that we've added the label, let's add an edit box and align it using the alignment guides. And then let's add also a checkbox which allows the user to set a preference for dark theming. And let's put here a message, use dark theme inside app. All right, so now we've added this dialog. We need to bind these controls to Windows installer properties. And this is very easy to do. We simply go here in the right section. Let me adjust the columns a bit. And here for the property name, let's choose a custom property. In our case, let's set it to preferred name. And for the checkbox, let's use it to use dark theme. Now we've successfully made bindings to Windows installer properties. Let's take a moment to test this to see if it works as we think it should. I've hit run and now the project is being built and I'm getting an error because I forgot to close the previous installation and the file is already in use, but no worry, I can try again. All right, so now something is failing and I'm sure that it is our script over here because nothing else could be failing at this point. Now, we will often find ourselves in this position where things are failing. Now, in order to repair our project, we need to detect the failure point. And for this script, we have two options. Either we revert to testing it using the button, and let's do that. If we click this button, we will see that the return code is not 0, so it is a failure. And we get a message informing us that the term say hello is not recognized. So it would appear that when I removed the sample code for say hello, I forgot to remove its invocation. Let's remove that as well. Let's remove this altogether and hit run again. All right, so now my installation is back and running again. But let's go back for a second, back to our state that breaks the installation and run it again. I can use also this small button here to quickly run my package up in the title bar. And here the installation failed again, but in the installation log, which I'm not seeing here, we will be able to see a message. So if I want to see the installation log, I can just click this checkbox here to show the log. And now it is being enabled. I can run again. And now we will see a very verbose output being displayed here. And if we closely examine this log, we will see here that we have an execution log for the PowerShell script informing us of our problem, saying that the say hello commandlet is not recognized. So we can use to debug our issues either the test button or simply examining the log. Now let's get back to our task of interest, which is to see if our custom dialog is being displayed correctly. This is the dialog for choosing a location for our app, which is in program files. And this is our custom dialog, which is looking good. Now let's interact with these items. Let's say I'm writing here my name, Gabriel. When I'm interacting with the buttons here, I can see that in the log, there are a few lines indicating changes being made. I'm seeing here that there was a property being set for preferred name to the value Gabriel, which is what I did in the user interface. And these two lines are saying that whenever I am clicking this checkbox, the use dark theme property is either being deleted, so it doesn't have a value, or it's being set to the value checkbox. And this value is configurable in the dialogs view here. If we look here, we see that we have a value for checkbox. We don't need to further customize this. For our purposes, it's just fine. So what do we need to do? Here we need to grab these two properties, the preferred name property and the use dark theme property. And we need to write them in the configuration file. However, this puts us in a situation to decide the exact moment in time to launch our custom action. Here in the installation UI would be too early because the resources themselves have not been installed in this location. We want to write in our configuration file, which will be found here, after the resources are installed there. And we will be able to do that simply by drag and dropping this after the add resources step during the installation execution stage. If you need further granularity here to show additional steps that happen during the installation, there is a context menu which you can use here for show standard action. So we can see that the add resources standard action has available a lot more discrete steps that you can display. For example, the move files. And if I click on it, I will see move files displayed here. If I need to place my custom action precisely between or after a particular action, I can show that custom action in the UI and drag my PowerShell script right in the spot I need it to be. Now, regarding our little script, it will need to be a deferred custom action. In Windows installer, we have two types of custom actions. We have more than two, but the two I am going to highlight here are the immediate custom actions and the deferred custom actions. The immediate custom actions are being executed before the system is being actually modified with the resources being put in place. And then in this case for immediate custom actions, we have access to Windows installer properties. But if we want to actually do something on the disk, so we want to, from our custom action, to write a file or something that's physical on our system, then we need to make our custom action be a deferred one. And this has a few side effects. The major one is that in a deferred custom action, we don't have access to Windows installer properties. If we, as we saw in our demo script earlier, we have two commands, set property and get property. But we cannot use these in a deferred custom action. They are not accessible to a deferred custom action. All we have available to us is the custom action data that's being given as input. But in this scenario, we can use our section here for parameter values. As we know, all PowerShell scripts can be invoked using parameters. And let's do that. Let's parameterize our script. Let's add a parameter for the name and a second parameter for dark theme. And let's give values to them. So for the name, I'm going to give first, start with double quotes. This is something you always need to take into account. And I'm going to use simply hitting the square bracket key opens up a suggestion dialog here from which I can choose what I want to input. And I'm going to choose a property, and it's a user interface property. And I'm going to select here the preferred name. And it's automatically being put in place for me. And I'm going to do the same thing for the dark theme setting. Like I mentioned, the double quotes are useful in situations where there may be spaces in the values. For example, if I enter a name that has spaces, if I don't make sure to include these double quotes, my string will not be correctly transmitted to the script. It will only be until the space character is encountered. So we avoid that by using double quotes. And here, let's use the dark theme property. All right. Looking good so far. And of course, we must write in some location. So we want to write this configuration setting, the two of them, in this file at install time. So we will need to know the location. And let's add a third parameter for our script named configFile. And here also double quotes. And here, instead of a property, we can actually use our file. And we have here our config file, select it, hit OK. And now it's all in place. We have our name, dark theme, and the file where we want to write our configuration. We need now to reproduce the parameter names exactly as we define them here in the parameter values in the parameter section of the script. So here we have, just like with variables, we need to start with the $, $name, $dark theme, and $config theme. Okay, now that these are in place, writing to a PowerShell, to a script using PowerShell is straightforward. We simply use the greater than operator, which is not doing it, redirecting something in PowerShell. This is not an arithmetic operator. It just looks like a greater than operator. All right, so we need to write the config file and what to write. And now let's bring into view our script, our configuration file here. So we need to write this. First of all, we need to have the username prefix, and let's put that into place. And then the name actually being input by the user. Then new line, which in PowerShell is done with a backtick, and then N for a new line. And then the second line for the dark theme setting right here, and use the dark theme variable. And let's see what this is going to do. Now, let's make sure to open this file. Let's say here, just for our testing purposes, let's say notepad configFile, so that the file will be open in Notepad, so we see the side effects. Unfortunately, we cannot run the script using this button now, because it cannot run. The properties at this point, when hitting the test script button, are empty. They are not being set. So we need to actually run the script. Excuse me. All right, going back into it. Looks like I made a small typo here, which I've just observed. This is called configFile instead of config theme. All right, now before I actually run this package, let's make sure here that we run it only during the installation. I don't want my script to run during uninstall, and I don't want my script to run during maintenance for this demo. All right, again, the error because I forgot to close my previous attempt. Run it again. All right, next. Let's put this into clipboard. Maybe it's useful. And let's put here my name, use also with a space to make sure those double quotes are working as they should. Next, install. Now the package is actually being installed on my machine. We see here that the package has been digitally signed. It's a verified publisher with a self-signed certificate. And the installation has failed. And now also we need to do some debugging. Unfortunately, doing this in Notepad is not an easy task, so I'm just going to comment this. I'm willing to bet that this is the line that's giving us headache. Let's try this again. Let's not waste time digging using Notepad. All right, my name again. And still not working. Looks like something is not working. Let's use our message box from earlier to do some investigating here. So this is a temporary script. I don't want that. And let's add this here. And let's put this in a variable, my data. And I will write my data in the configuration file. And now I want to display a message box with my data, and a message box with the config file. Whatever is going on here, it has to do with one of these parameters. So let's hit run again and see what this debugging will show us. All right, my values here. Okay, so the first message box looks good to me. So we have username and dark theme checkbox, which is not ideal. Here we need to have true or false. So we need to adjust our script, but it's a non-empty value, so that's good. And this is also looking good. So yeah, right now I think I know what's going on. The problem here is that the location in which I'm installing this app is residing inside program files, which is a protected location. So I need to check this option here to run with full privileges. This will make sure that my custom action will be granted the requirement access it needs. Let's try again. Yes. All right. I'm seeing the value we need to write and the path we need to write it into. And now the installation has succeeded. So we have a success story. All right. Now let's uncomment this line as well and see if it works with this so that we see our file directly in Notepad. All right. Let's do it again. Next. Looking good. And we can see here that we have a configuration file put in place for us. We have this value that it's not looking as it should. So here we need to have true or false, not checkbox. And let's take care of that. So we just need to make sure that this dark theme is correctly interpreted. So here, let's comment these message boxes. Let's create a variable setting dark theme setting and initialize it with false. And then if the input parameter dark theme is not null or empty, and here not null or empty, then we set dark theme setting to the value true. And now we can remove these altogether. Let's bring the whole script into view. Hit run again. And let's not bother with the config file itself. Now let's actually launch my file. And for this, let's use another custom action, the launch install file custom action, because we already have support for such a task. We don't need to use PowerShell any longer. And we will launch the app, a defer custom action, also with privileges, and make sure to drag and drop it after the, let's rename it now, to configure app. And here also the launch app custom action. Let's rename it to launch app. And let's see what happens now. Right now, the old version that's already installed is being removed, and now the new one is ready to be installed. Now, in this empty checkbox here, I'm going to write my name again, and let's see what the default is. So the default right now is a dark setting. So let's uncheck this and see if our application does the right thing. So looks like my application itself is failing now. It's trying to load the configuration file from a wrong location, and this is regarding this option here of full privileges. So when I run the application, it doesn't require admin privileges. Let's try again. All right, it looks like I have gotten myself in a invalid state. The problem now is that I've marked this custom action to run on uninstall. And since it is now failing, my previous version is unable to be removed. This is a particular gotcha with Windows installer packages. Always make sure that your custom actions don't fail on uninstall. So in order to quickly get around this issue, I can simply increment my product version and generate a new product code for this demo purposes. There are other workarounds, valid workarounds for this kind of situation. But let's quickly get around the issue. And now, also inputting my name. Something else failed. Looks like the demo gods are not happy with us today. Let's go back to our custom action here. And I'm pretty sure that this launch app is also encountering issue because of our location. So let's for this demo, let's go ahead and simply run it manually. Okay, so I'm going to copy this location in clipboard, put my name here, and proceed. It's again failing. Okay, so in this situation, looks like I forgot to do one more step. Here in the upgrade code, I need to change also my upgrade code. And now we should be good to go. Because my application was trying to uninstall the previous version, which is failing on uninstall, and that's what's breaking our demo here. All right. So we see the configuration, which is also not the correct value. Looks like we're almost done, but not quite. So going back to our script here, one more final debugging step. Let's remove this notepad step. And here we continue to use the script input parameter, whereas we should be using this variable here. And now I am confident that our demo is going to work. Try again. And let's make sure to use the light theme. All right, the installation has succeeded, and let's go to our install location. So we need to go to program files. Our company name is Playground Inc. So we should look for it here, Playground Inc., Playground app. And this is our application. And if we run it, we see that it's using a light theme and it's correctly using my name. So we've achieved the task that we wanted to do in customizing our app. But please bear with me for one more tweak. So let's first remove our app. And take a moment to observe. It looks like I'm moving too fast here and breaking the application. I'm going to run it again. And the situation I'm highlighting here is that this checkbox is empty by default. And this is not a pleasant experience usually. So what I would like to do is for my installer to have something here as a default value. And I cannot just put here Emma, John, or whatever. Let's use the Windows username, the current Windows username, which is present in an environment variable. And retrieving such a variable is easy to do with a PowerShell script. So let's add another PowerShell script and make sure that it's way here, way up in the execution stage during the user interface. And what I need to do here is simply set the property preferred name to the value env username. And I'm going to delete this. I no longer need the parameter section. I just need the requires statement. And let's test this script. So now I'm being informed that this script is running successfully. I don't need to go through the hassle of testing my entire installation. And its side effect is that this variable preferred name is being set to my current Windows username, which is this one. So now what I need to do is either position this custom action way early in the installation sequence, and let's give it this a spin and see what it does. So my custom action is already invoked at this stage, and this message, this input box being bound to a property is correctly pre-populating the value of my username. The alternative would be to set the script instead of a sequenced custom action as an unsequenced custom action. And we can see here our script being highlighted with a lightning bolt. Now this script can be triggered by an UI event, hence the lightning bolt. And let's do that. Now, if I also run again my installer, just to highlight the side effect, the edit field will be empty because my script now is no longer being invoked. I no longer see it in my installation sequence. But let's trigger it using an UI event. So this is my dialog, which is being populated. And on the previous dialog, the folder dialog, on this next button, let's add an event. So if I go here to events for this button, add a new event, and from this list of possible events, I'm going to execute a custom action. And here in the event options area, I can select my custom action, which I forgot to properly name. Let's rename it. Let's give it a proper name. So pre-populate username. Going back to the user dialog section, on this button, on the folder dialog, I'm going to add this event. So I'm going to call pre-populate username custom action. Hit run again. And now I can see, hopefully, that yes, my field is correctly populated. And this mechanism can be used throughout your installation user interface to call whichever unsequenced custom action you desire. All right, so now our installer is looking in a good shape. We've gotten through a few hiccups, but we've resolved the situations that occurred. Now we are nearing our presentation end. I'm sorry about the slight delay. Let me make sure that I have gone through everything I want to highlight in this session. So looks like I have covered pretty much everything in this session. One more thing that I want to highlight, which is an advanced situation, but you may encounter this. Let's say we want to set a property which is a dynamic name. So my property name is preferred name. If I want to set this property like this, using a variable, which this may be changed during this execution of the script, let's see what it does. So it's changed, it correctly changed the property to the value I'm interested in. However, there is a limitation. If this works correctly for set property, but not for get property. If I do this, let's comment the set property here. If I do this, it will not, you may find that it's not working as you expect it to work. If you mention directly the property name, it will function correctly. However, if you write it using a variable, it will not work. So let's see why in our situation. Let's undo. And now, which is this is my my step. So I need to do this in a variable, and let's make sure. Let's do something else. Let's create a property here, saying test property, and let's initialize it with a simple test. This is being done in the properties view in Advanced Installer. And now let's set our preferred name property, and instead of using the env username PowerShell environment variable, let's use our test property. And we put this in a value variable, and let's initialize this with get property. All right, and my property is called test property. Get property for test property. And let's run this script as a test. And now we see that our preferred name Windows installer property was changed to the correct value, because I forgot to actually use this value here. So instead of the environment variable, I'm going to use the value. Now, let's see what happens. It does what I expect it to do. It gets the property value from this test property Windows installer prop, and then sets it in the preferred name property. But now let's change one step further. Instead of simply hard coding this name here, let's put this in another variable. Let's call it test prop. And try it again. And at first glance, you would think that this is going to work, but it will not work. And it could be a frustrating gotcha. And the explanation for this is as follows. This mechanism for accessing Windows installer properties is handmade by us using that auxiliary script. And this means that before your script is invoked, we must make a short analysis and see what properties we need, and write those in a temporary location, read them from the script, and update when set property is called any modified properties in that, also in that temporary file. And afterwards, after your script is invoked, we read that file and update the properties, which means that as the consequence means that this will work with variable names, but this will not, because our scanner will be unable to detect what this is. It works when you hardcode the name, because our scanner sees that you will need to access test property, and it will fetch that property value for you. Using a variable here is obfuscating this command, is no longer plain and simple to detect what it will retrieve. So in order to get around this issue, you can simply write a comment. So not a line that will be executed, just write a comment and say here, test property, get property for this property name. This will inform our scanner that somewhere in the script, you will need to retrieve this property. And when you will actually be invoking the command for retrieving it, it will already be prefetched and ready for you. And this I can do, for example, if I have more of them, I need to do with all of them. And then this command here can stay the same, but my property can have a variable name that will change accordingly during the execution. So now on this final test, I can see that it did what it should do. It took one property and copied it into another. Like I said, this is a corner case. It's an unusual situation. Most of the time, you will be using the syntax like this, directly mentioning the property which you need to get or set. All right, so with this more specialized example, I am finished with my demo. Now, let me go back to my slides here. And one more minute to highlight what we have covered in this demo earlier. I think we are ready to finalize. Now, about this recap, we've seen a few things today. How Advanced Installer allows you to integrate PowerShell scripts in the user interface, and the differences between Windows PowerShell and PowerShell 7, and that you can write your advanced installer scripts directly, your PowerShell scripts directly in advanced installer, not being forced to go through a separate editor. If you choose to do that, let me show you how. Here in the PowerShell list, you can simply add a script file, and everything I have shown you earlier is still valid, but you simply specify which script from disk you will be running. You can also test it. You can also give it parameters. You also have the options available to you. This will be useful to you if you have a script that's somewhere in a source control scenario and it's being automatically grabbed using Git, for example. Now, our final recap here was about running sequenced, unsequenced, and triggering our scripts from the user interface, from a button, for example, or when a new dialog is being shown, and how to use Windows installer properties, either with get property and set property in immediate custom actions, or in the case of deferred custom actions, which don't have access to Windows installer properties, we can use the script parameters field to inject parameter values into our script and get values from properties. And then I have also mentioned, last but not least on this slide, the option to control the running location for your scripts. That intricate scenario where some execution restrictions apply to the target system and you need to run in a specific allowed location. So this is about all for today. Let's now jump to the questions section and let's see if we have something that remained unanswered by my colleagues. Looks like we have quite a bit of activity here. So it looks like somebody is an anonymous message has been grateful for me mentioning the dynamic retrieval of properties using get property, and is mentioning that this is they consider that is not actually a corner case. Yes, I understand your concerns regarding this, and we will take this into account. We will make it more plainly known how to get around this limitation. We will update our documentation regarding this. Thank you. All right, let's go and see the other comments here. Looks like somebody also asked for that, how to do that for dynamic property names. Another, maybe it's the same person. And like my colleagues answered, it's not an official feature we support. The workaround I have shown you here is a consequence of how our internal machinery works. A proper workaround would be for it to work directly out of the box. However, we don't have support for that at the moment. So Wolowski is asking, so if I use the inline PowerShell script options in the custom actions, I can read all variables when logging the installation with PowerShell. If I now load an external PowerShell file into my project and execute this script, would the variables also be visible when logging the installation? Yes. Regarding this question, like I mentioned, you have the option of running your scripts either as inline scripts, which means you write them, edit them, and test them directly in Advanced Installer, or as attached scripts, which you can edit in your editor of preference, such as Visual Studio Code, and they will behave identically as the inline ones. So also this question is mentioning native C# DLLs. regarding native C# is a misnomer, I think, because a native DLL is one written in C++ and a C# is a managed one. But I'm going to address the C# one. You can write custom actions in both languages, also in C++ and in C#. But in either language, you need to use the respective framework. In C++, you need to use the Windows installer headers, and in C# you need to use the respective dependencies in order to gain access to Windows installer properties and the installation log. But a native or managed DLL is a much lower level custom action, and you need to implement things at a lower level. So you will have a bit more work on your hands. Now, let me browse through some other questions here. Let's check some other questions. Here you have an email address you can use. It's also mentioned in the comments here regarding how you can reach out to us. Somebody is mentioning an important question here. Is there any risk in using PowerShell script with simple operations such as modifying property values, and the risk taken into relation to antivirus software? So this always is a bit of an unknown. In our experience, we have had PowerShell integration in Advanced Installer for the better part of the past 7 years. This has been almost 100% reliable. We have had over the years one single incident in which Windows Defender decided to target us as being suspicious when we were invoking our scripts from temporary locations, but we have swiftly gotten in contact with them, and after a quick verification, everything was checked out, cleared, and then we received a green light. And in the span of, I think, 30 hours, the whole situation was resolved. But except that, there have been no other incidents that we are aware of in the past 7 years. My colleague is on this question. One of my colleagues has mentioned the strict policies that can be enforced by PowerShell. This is a valid thing to consider. Some systems may restrict the execution of scripts except digitally signed scripts. This is part of the reason why we chose to sign our scripts by default. So this will help you in that. If your package uses a digital signature, all your PowerShell scripts are digitally signed. Moving on to another question. Tyler O'Malley is mentioning that he wonders if we have the possibility to use some other functionality of Advanced Installer for writing in that text file. Yes, in this particular scenario, maybe we can find a feature of Advanced Installer such as the one you mentioned in your reply. However, my point in this sample was to have a simple showcase that I can use to exhibit how to set up a PowerShell script in order for you to affect custom modifications during your installation. And writing to a text file is a pretty simple thing to do, and it wouldn't complicate needlessly the script that we need to write and debug in such a short time. So that's why I chose this particular scenario. It also is a good showcase for us to use Windows installer properties and how to input, how to transmit a file, an installed file path to our script, like we saw with that configuration file. So yes, you can use a file update for that. All right, moving on. David is asking regarding Advanced Installer 16.1 and that he is unable to find the PowerShell Script Options link. That is nothing to be worried about because it's a more recent change, such as my colleague mentioned. The UI has been recently adapted. When we introduced the option for having a preferred launch folder, in order to keep our user interface clean, we decided to move some of the options in this new dialog that I've shown you. However, the digital signature options and the options for setting bitness 32 or 64 or auto were already present in your version, in your case 16.1. What will be missing is the option for setting a preferred launch folder, which is a more recent addition. Let's see if I can give more input on any issue here. I'm delighted to see that people have been have found this presentation to be useful and have learned new things from it. Someone, Craig, has asked if there is a command for writing to the installer log file, and a colleague has also already answered that you can use write output for that, and that is the right answer. So simply, as you would in a regular PowerShell script written outside, such as in Visual Studio Code, write output, use write output. Hans mentions that the not operator in PowerShell is minus not. Yes, it is, but also like a colleague answered, you can use the bang operator as well, such as you would in C. This is a professional defect of mine. On a day-to-day basis, I'm using C++ in my line of work, and it's a force of habit for me. It works in PowerShell as well. So when it comes to if statements, so that's why I'm using it instead of the minus not operator. It's easier for me to write it because I use it a lot and it works. PowerShell accepts it. Moving forward, Amit is asking how to install application only in machine where Chrome 32-bit is installed using PowerShell. I think, and this is quite a long thread of discussion here. Looks like there may be some new feature. Let me take a screenshot for this so that I can examine it later. I'm not getting the full picture in a few seconds of reading the message here. So Amit, please follow up on this question regarding, it's not clear to me what the particular scenario would be in your situation. Please follow up with us and we'll be happy to help you along. So somebody, Sean Humphrey, is asking regarding my config parameters here in Advanced Installer. what this dash symbol means. And like my colleague answered, this indicates that we have selected a file instead of a Windows installer property. Also, I forgot to mention, here you are free to type manually the entire string, but as I've demonstrated, we have an editor in place that will will automatically, when you select from the UI, properties, files, and so on, it will automatically insert them here. Okay, back to the slides here, and let's see if there is any other question. So somebody is asking, Matthew is asking if Advanced Installer could implement the set and get property in PowerShell code instead of doing text replacement inside the script. The answer here is that we already are doing what you're suggesting. The get and set property mechanisms are actual PowerShell commandlets that we are using. We are not replacing anything inside the script, for the reason that now we are digitally signing the scripts, and if we were to replace anything inside the script, it would break the digital signature. Doing any modification invalidates the digital signature. So I have mentioned during the presentation, but maybe I was too quick about it. Let me refresh the information. What we are doing is using a temporary text file separate from your script, in which we determine what properties you need, we place them, their values in that file, and the get and set properties, set property functions that you are using in your script will be operating using that temporary file. After the execution of the script is finalized, our C++ native code will continue the work and actually taking the modified values from that temporary file and calling the set property native function of Windows installer and making the changes live in your installation. So the text is not being affected in any way using get property and set property. Your script remains identical to how you write it. I'm pleased to see that Craig is appreciating our support for custom actions using PowerShell compared to our competition. Thank you for your appreciation. We do try to make it as easy and as useful as possible. There is one more question that is waiting for an answer. So it's from user 117204. So this user is mentioning that they are encountering permission issues on the registry. So while building the package, they're getting something regarding insufficient access to a registry key. I'm sorry, I cannot help you at this moment. It's I am not getting enough context for this. This may be due to a lack of access to some particular registry. I'm not sure. You can follow up with us at the email address mentioned here, support advanced installer, and we will do our best to help you in resolving this situation. So this is about everything. I can offer additional input from the comment section. Thank you for the lively comments that you have written here. And I hope everyone attending here has learned something useful and new regarding PowerShell, running PowerShell scripts in your installation packages. how to write them, test them, and actually executing them. So this is all for today. We are at the end of this session. Thank you for joining me today, and I wish you a great day. Bye.